are such a genuine gem, thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke Makenna, but today's case is the old Hollywood case of Ramon Novarro. Now, this super popular Hollywood actor had kept a secret from the public for many years. But is this what led to his murder? By the way, I am posting so much content for Suspect Summer, so if you are interested in this type of content, make sure to subscribe, and if you want to give me a thumbs up, it would make my day. Now let's get back to the story. It was 1968 in Laurel Canyon, Los Angeles, California, and Ramon was a 68-year-old retired actor living in the area. Now, Ramon in his prime as a superstar was compared to Rudolph Valentino as a more gentle version of him. Ramon grew up in a very wealthy family. His father was a dentist, he was the fourth of 12 children, and they were pretty well off and had a pretty good childhood. That was until his father had to retire due to a disease. And after this, they had to immigrate to Texas to kind of get by and have enough money. And from there, they would actually move to Los Angeles to support Ramon's dreams of being an actor. Ramon was willing to work extremely hard for this too. He was going to multiple auditions while he also ushered for a theater. He was taking any sort of extra jobs he could in films. And that is where he would be scouted for another big part. Now, this wasn't really a part in a movie, but it was a part in a dance troupe. You see, he worked at a theater called Majestic, and this theater would bring in a woman named Mary Ann Morgan, and she had a dance troupe, and she scouted Ramon to be in it. From here, this would launch him into actual films such as The Prisoner of Zenda in 1922 when he was just 22 years old. Because of this, he would sign with Metro Pictures, who was huge at the time, MGM, and they would cast him for many more movies to come, such as Ben-Hur, A Tale of the Christ, and Scaramouche, and Where the Pavement Ends. Between 1925 and 1935, Ramon made more money than any other actor for MGM except for Joan Crawford, and he even transferred nicely into talkies as Hollywood introduced sound. People still loved to hear his voice as well as his acting, and he was doing so incredibly well. But you see, this entire time Ramon had a secret that he had been keeping from the public, and that was that he was a gay man. Press and newspapers would often rumor these type of things around Ramon, but one reporter actually had proof, and his name was Herbert Howe. And that's because he was a publicist on a film that Ramon was working on, and the two had gotten very close. In fact, extremely intimately close. But Herbert did not take it to the press to out Ramon in any way. He actually did his best to cover it up, even when MGM got new management and were trying to really make it known that Ramon was not a gay man. They were trying to cover up any sort of facts that he could possibly be. They were trying to tell the public that he was going on multiple dates with super popular starlets. They were just really trying to do anything possible to make sure that nobody knew that Ramon was gay. Fortunately, though, they didn't force him to go on any dates or actually have any intimate relationships or get married to anyone like we've seen in the public before. But they did do their best to cover up that he was gay. But although they did that, the press was also on the opposite end trying to expose him and get a secret out there. But it was said that because of Herbert Howe and their relationship, it really kept this under wraps, because Herbert would only claim that they were close friends. He would say things like Ramon was a very kind-hearted man that used all of his money to take care of his family and really focused more on his personality, his heart, rather than his sexual preferences, as it always should be, because obviously that doesn't matter. We're all human anyway. And so Herbert was said to be a very strong factor in keeping this secret a secret. But in 1928, Herbert and Ramon officially broke up, and Herbert went to a newspaper to write an article about Ramon. And no, he didn't necessarily say anything that would expose him, but he did say some pretty harsh things. You get an essence of him seeing him on the screen. Off the screen, he is a theater with the lights out. And after that, although Ramon's films were doing well, and he even added singing to his list of talents, he could do any sort of thing that they wanted, dancing, singing, acting. He was a triple threat in these movies, but because of the Great Depression, the economy was so bad at this time that even Ramon was being asked by MGM to take a pay cut. Of course, he refused because his movies were still making money and he deserved that money. But it came down to, in 1935, a studio fixer named Eddie Mannix was going to talk to him about basically being fired. Now, we've talked about Eddie Mannix before in the George Reeves case that I did, and a studio fixer is basically someone who does all the dirty work in Hollywood behind the scenes so that it's not huge press news and out in the public, but they basically do anything by any means necessary to get things done in Hollywood, and it can be sometimes very harsh, as we've seen in George's case. But in Ramon's case, he was actually offered $19,000 to leave Hollywood completely, and this wasn't really an offer. This was more a, you are either going to take it or you're going to leave with no money at all. And so of course he took the money, but this led to Ramon's mental breakdown, where he really truly started his alcoholism journey and led down a very dark path. Ramon didn't seek treatment like he should have at this point. In fact, he moved from the mansion where his family, he had bought a mansion for his family and lived there with him. He moved from there to a small little Spanish style house that was a much, much smaller downgrade, but he did this to save money. He also started on unemployment in the 1960s, and around the same time had gotten 2 DUIs really close to one another. He was just on a downward spiral. For years, he had also been using a male escort service because, of course, he couldn't just openly go out and find a male partner, and so he was using these escort services, this one in particular called masseurs, and he would often get his assistant named Edward Weber to write these men checks, and they would be under gardening services rather than what they were actually doing, obviously. But his assistant was also the one that would go and get him alcohol and anything he wanted, really. But then it was Wednesday, October 30th, 1968, and Edward Weber, Ramon's assistant, had a day off. But he had gone to the store that he often went to get Ramon's alcohol, and he had just went in there on his own when the owner, who of course knew he worked for Ramon, said that Ramon had just placed an order for cigarettes. Edward thought this was weird because Ramon didn't really smoke, but he offered to go ahead and drop it off at Ramon's house anyway, so he picked them up and he took them to Ramon's house. Ramon opened the door in a robe, kind of surprised to see Edward because of course it was his day off. He was freshly shaven, he smelled of soap, and he didn't really invite Edward in. He kind of just took the cigarettes and shut the door as if he had company already. That was around 5:30 p.m. that evening, and of course Edward left to go home because he was going to report back the next morning on October 31st, Halloween, for work at 8:30 a.m. And when he did so, he found a terrifying scene. He walked in and there were just furniture overturned everywhere. There was also glasses broken, and when he went to Ramon's bedroom, it was pitch dark because the curtains were still closed. When he went to open these curtains, he found Ramon lying on his back, naked, on his bed, severely beaten to death. He had scratches on his neck, and there was blood on the floor and the ceiling, and a tooth had been knocked out. Ramon's hands were tied behind his back with an electrical cord that also reached down to his ankles, and in his right hand he had a white condom. The mirror on his bedroom also had a message written on it in brown makeup pencil, and it said something that was so incredibly wrong that I don't feel comfortable saying it, so I'm going to write it on the screen here for you to see, but it was definitely something that was derogatory and unnecessary completely. But there was also a name, Larry, on the bedsheet next to him written in ink. After finding this, Edward of course immediately called the police, and this led to the police getting there quickly, but also the news spread to the reporters. And a pile of bloody clothes was found on the opposite side of his iron fence, and they were bloody clothes. It was a undershirt, a jacket, a t-shirt, and 2 pairs of underwear. Then the murder weapon was found, a silver-tipped cane used to beat Ramon. After an autopsy was done, it was found that he had bruises all over his body, his chest, neck, his left arm, his penis, everywhere. Ramon's blood alcohol level was said to be much higher than the legal level, but his cause of death was said to be caused by suffocation due to choking on his own blood. But who had done this to him? Well, on the previous night of October 30th, Ramon had invited 2 brothers over to his house. They were Tom and Paul Ferguson, and they had gotten his number from another client of Ramon's, and they had planned to meet up, have some drinks, and possibly hook up later that night, of course from this male escort service. Allegedly, the night started with Ramon kind of reading their palms, saying what their future held, teaching them music that he composed on the piano. And he even called a publicist friend of his and said that he had some boys there that he thought had star quality and wanted to basically have a meetup with this film publicist. You see, Paul was 22 and Tom was 17, and they both obviously had very conflicting statements when they were arrested of what exactly happened that night, because they were blaming each other. You see, Paul said he fell asleep on the couch and he awoke to Tom telling him that Ramon was dead, and yet Tom said this was completely wrong and that he was on the phone with a girl from Chicago when he began to hear screaming. But allegedly, Paul and Ramon had went into Ramon's bedroom to do what they were getting paid for. When Paul started to demand $5,000, it was allegedly in Ramon's home that he just kept on hand, but the money did not exist there. In fact, Ramon wasn't said to keep that much money on hand at all. But after this, Paul and possibly Tom, the 2 of them, got very angry with this and allegedly started to beat him profusely, even dragging him to the bathroom to splash water on him when he would go unconscious. Now, Ramon was telling them he could write them a check. It wasn't a big deal, but they continued to beat him with this cane. And this was when Ramon would start sobbing, saying, "Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee," and this was said to be his last words. But this didn't explain why the message on the mirror started with "us girls," but really, in fact, it did. You see, Paul and Tom had wanted it to come across like this was some female escort who wanted revenge. That's why they wrote it in makeup, and that's why they ransacked his house after they had beat him and kind of threw all of his photos around on the ground. And this in fact worked. Investigators were kind of looking for female escorts until the woman on the phone with Tom from Chicago gave them their biggest clue, because she had heard the screams as well. And she called in to tell exactly who was on the phone with her that night. The Ferguson brothers. And they were arrested, and their fingerprints were found throughout the house. A few other witnesses even came forward after that, saying that the Ferguson brothers had bragged about Ramon's murder. And the name Larry that was written on the bedsheet, that wasn't just a random name to throw off police. You see, I told you that the Ferguson boys had gotten Ramon's number from another client of Ramon's, and that was a man named Larry Ortega. But the trial for the Fergusons focused far too much on Ramon's sexual preference rather than his murder, and the brother's mother would say that the 2 brothers even said he deserved to be killed, he was nothing but a... Ramon was even ridiculed by the court, saying that possibly he seduced the boys into doing something they didn't want to do, and that is why they murdered him. And Ramon's character was really put on trial more than the men who were guilty for taking a life. Then Paul convinced Tom to admit to the murders because Paul said Tom was younger and would most likely not get the death penalty and would get them both the least sentences that they could. However, when the prosecution told Tom that they were going for execution, he decided to recant his confession and tell the truth. And this led to both of the boys getting convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. And the judge really said that they never were going to be able to see the real world again, and that they never should. Except they both did, because Tom was released in 6 years and Paul was released in 9. And in fact, this wouldn't be the last time they would both be in jail. They would both be in jail many other times, and for rape as well. And Tom would actually slit his own throat in a suicide in 2005. But why these brothers killed Ramon, I'm really not sure. I mean, were they so desperate for money that when they knew he didn't have any with him, they decided to take his life? But that doesn't make any sense to me, because Ramon seemed to be very open with sharing his money, his knowledge, his contacts. He even had called a publicist and had wanted to get them into Hollywood, which of course was going to bring them money. And I just feel like he would be a better asset alive than dead. I'm truly leaning more towards the fact that Ramon was a gay man, and that is why they decided to go ahead and take his life. I mean, this whole case screams absurd behavior. I mean, I can't even tell you how many times it was looked at more who Ramon enjoyed being with rather than getting justice for him. And I truly believe that's why the Ferguson brothers got out so soon, because no one cared about his justice just because he liked men. And that makes me sick. And that's why I wanted to tell this story today, to hopefully give him the spotlight he deserved for being a wonderful human who had his life taken. I don't understand why it mattered that he was into men. I mean, it's not like he was a predator of any sort. It makes me so angry, and his trial in general makes me so angry. The words used to describe him as a victim. I mean, this trial was supposedly supposed to be to get justice for his murder, and they treated him more like the guilty than the victim. And I just, when I started reading about this, I knew I wanted to bring it to you guys, and just to let you know that things like this happened and things like this still happen. And please, if you ever think that because somebody likes the same gender or likes something different than you, they deserve less than you, I hope you know that that is not ever okay. And especially for any younger viewers watching, I just want you to know that even if you don't grow up in a household that teaches you that, I hope that I can do it here, and hopefully that you are more open-minded to people and more respectful, because truly we are all humans down to our core, and Ramon never did anything bad and should have never been treated that way ever. So, I mean, and it does make me sad too that he had to keep the secret out of Hollywood and out of the public for so long too. I truly hope that that was his decision, that he just, wasn't ready to come out, rather than him feeling like he couldn't get any jobs in Hollywood because he was, which is what, unfortunately, I think that it was. But I'd love to hear your theories about this case, and any comments you have, make sure to please be respectful down in the comments, because that is what I request and that is what I allow on my channel. So don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.